You learn by doing, basically. If you want to be a writer, you got to write. It's no good. You
Mm.
can read as many books about writing as you like, and I do have a few of those on my shelf. But ultimately, you've got to sit down and face that horrible blank page and put stuff into it. And it's the same with any other creative. If you
This is the Living Numbers podcast where everyone is interesting if you ask the right questions. Of course, before we get everything started, share, rate, review. I'm not going to ask you to do anything else. Share, rate, review. And if you want more behind the scenes stuff, me and Gareth talked about music. We talked about dogs, how we get our days started. If you want that stuff and the stuff that we do afterwards, you can definitely subscribe on Apple or Spotify for the behind the scenes content. Also, of course, you follow me on IG, TikTok, The Living Numbers Podcast, and you can purchase merch, The Living Numbers Podcast on Etsy. Now, with that being said, bills being paid, it's time to give our wonderful, wonderful guest an introduction. Hailing from Manchester, England, our guest is an eclectic creator with a multitude of talents, including writing, acting, and sound production. And none of this stuff is even his day job. He's the host of Very British Futures, a website of short stories. He writes movie reviews and is a technical officer at Manchester Metropolitan University. I present the super Black Sabbath fan, Gareth Preston. Say hello to the people, Gareth.
Hello, and thank you for that marvelous introduction.
I do my best. And so I interview people that are not just in America. So tell everybody, what time is it right now where you are?
It is 9 p.m. at the moment over here. We're just had it's just been New Year. We've just had the New Year's bank holiday, and I'm preparing myself to get back to work after a week off.
Aren't we all? And Gareth is, I think he's in his laundry room, which we talked about earlier, because I think it's very important. And I'm just going to throw this nugget in here. I know I usually don't do this, but it's really important wherever you are as we start this new year, wherever you are, whatever you have, use that and get started. Whatever it is that you want to do, wherever you feel like this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go. Hey, Garrett's in the closet. I was in the closet before. Okay, hey, I've got sheets and stuff up here to try to soundproof. Use what you have and go for it. Now, with that being said,
Mhm.
I have to introduce our first number, and that number is 92. So I looked up how many different trades are there because we're going to talk about what Gareth does. And I looked at a website and it said there are 92 different trades because I feel like Gareth is a jack of all trades when I looked up this description of his job. So he is a higher education technical officer. And so when I heard that, I'm like, okay, what is that? So please, Gareth, tell us what do you do? Because also talked about how you do have a pretty interesting job. So take us into where does it start?
Well, in simplest terms, the key word is support. I support
Okay.
both academics and students at Manchester Metropolitan University, specifically in the health and education faculties. It's a job I've done for quite a long while, and it's actually sort of changed underneath me. And I think I've
Mm,
kind of influenced what I do, but I'm part of a team, and basically we do everything from we lend out quite a lot of equipment to people, and that's everything from kind of nurse uniforms and anatomical models and the like, down to video cameras and recorders and all that sort of AV gear. And we provide advice and training on this equipment, and we look after specialist spaces. So as we're health, we have we've got some like robot patients that can be used in like simulated wards.
Okay.
Um, my particular bent is towards the AV stuff. That's kind of where I specialised, and so I'm quite often involved in filming students or creating content for
Hmm.
courses and helping academics to create content, usually videos, sometimes podcasts, and also computer projects. I help design little websites for a specific project, and they want to do it online, and I help facilitate that. So it's a real, you wear lots of different hats.
Mm.
There's also, I mean, there's boring parts of it too, like stock. There's the kind of databasey stock taking
Paperwork.
part of this job, paperwork of all kinds. But it's a quite a varied job. I'm lucky that I'm really doing the same thing day to day.
What's your favorite hat to wear? I know you talked about the audio video part.
That's definitely, I would say, my favorite. Is the video editing and creating a nice little educational video on the subject, and it's something I'll keep pushing and pushing. And we're just going to have our green screen delivered, which I've been, and some much better
Ooh.
microphones, some nice wireless tie microphones, because to
Mm.
get the sound
Mm.
a lot better. And so that's easily what I find most satisfying, uh, especially if I get a chance to go a bit beyond just that kind
Mm.
of two heads talking, sort of just recording. It's when you can actually get into something and telling a story and
Yeah.
editing, and that is those have been amongst my highlights, I would say.
I was talking to I forget. I forget how, because you have so many episodes, you talk to so many people. This might have been a conversation just with somebody in real life, but I was talking to somebody and we were talking about like when you love something, most of the time people don't have to ask you to go the extra mile or do the extra thing. It's like, well, this is what I enjoy doing. So I'm automatically kind of going to have these different ideas to make it better. Do you have an
Mm.
example where they were like, hey, Gareth, we just kind of need this kind of simple thing. And you kind of took it, ran with it, and it came to be much more than you thought it would be.
Oh, that's, well, I'm going to think of a better one after this podcast. But certainly, a lot of the time, like people, if they want something filming, and they probably just seen it
Mm,
as just a single camera, and they'll just film it, and I want to make it look a lot more like a TV program, so I'll bring three
mm,
cameras and sync them all together with the soundtrack, so you can have those kind of cuts between people as they're talking, and just make it look as glossy as possible. We're so lucky that we now live in an age where, thanks to prices coming down on PC and stuff, you
mm,
can get something looking quite glossy for and you don't need a whole TV studio or a whole
right.
kind of mixing desk or whatever. They're nice. I wouldn't turn them down, but it's amazing how far you can get. It's amazing how far you can get with the humble PC, and even just using free software.
Hmm. The barrier to entry is so much lower in
Mm,
these producing kind of roles. Where I remember like to record because I've recorded some music, back in the day,
mm,
and you didn't have to go to a whole studio. You didn't have to have a whole band with drums and the actual real guitar and stuff. You could do everything from your laptop or from your computer in your closet, right at home or at a friend's house. Where did the
mm.
story start? Right, you get to where you are now, but was this always the plan to work in education, doing what you do, as a technical officer, or did you kind of stumble upon this job, this career?
Definitely more the latter, more stumbling upon. I'd been to technical college and
Mm.
got what they call a BTEC Ordinary National Diploma in Electronic Engineering, and then did the higher national, what was then a polytechnic. Now it's a university. Everything's a university because for
Mm.
some reason polytechnics somehow had a reputation that they weren't as good as universities. So they got around that by allowing everybody to call themselves a university now.
Hmm.
And then I didn't really have a firm. I mean, I've at this point I was still thinking, oh, I'm going to write a bestseller or write, get into TV writing, but
The dream
I
was
had to
still
get
alive.
the dream was still alive, still going. But in the meantime, I needed a quote proper job, and so just
Hmm.
reading through, and I saw lab technician. I don't think it was called lab technician though. It was just kind of technician needed uh, at a university, and it was a 12-month limited job. And I thought,
Hmm.
well, that'll be really valuable. It's a year. It's really valuable experience. It was a different university. That was Salford University, and they were having a course that was basically being run down, but they still had a
Right.
few third year students left who needed to complete, and I was there supporting them. And then from there, after a short period of unemployment, I applied for Manchester Metropolitan University, and
Hmm.
at that time it was described as a technician in psychology and speech pathology, which is a slightly
Ooh.
pairing, but it just so happened there was these two courses and they both needed technical support, so they kind of pooled their resources and said, oh, could we get a guy
Mm.
to cover both of us? So, and
Right.
back then the job was a lot more setting. It was actually had a lot more sort of woodwork involved in it and metalwork and
Mm.
physically setting up equipment and scientific equipment for students, and then with a little bit of software on the side, and then gradually over the years, it has
Hmm.
become. The computers have, the internet exploded everywhere, and it became a much more computer-based kind of a
Yeah.
job, and like I said, because of my interest in AV and stuff, that's what I was really interested in. So I kind of anything to do with that, I pursued that, and then so that's basically. Oh, and I've basically stayed in the same job for a ridiculously long time. I might have a word with myself. If I could go back in time, I'd probably at the 10-year mark. Probably should have said you should seriously be applying for other jobs at this point. But there you go. There you are. But the fact is, I've enjoyed the job and it suits me. It's helping people. It's yeah, because it's just supporting people and helping people. And since we've built this resource team, which is now being actually we've built a model that's now being copied by other universities, where we kind of bring
Ooh, look at you.
yeah, we kind of bring together people with all different skill sets and into one place, and we all help each other to some extent. We learn from each other, and the number of hats that can potentially be worn grows even bigger. So I'm getting involved in all kinds of things on the health side. I mean, just
Yeah.
like we have
Like what?
this new scientific treadmill was just installed before Christmas, so a little bit involved
Hmm.
in that, and as well as more conventional AV and lending out and teaching people how to use camcorders and the like.
So, I mean, you've mentioned AV, you've mentioned all of the technical stuff. So I think that is only right that we introduce our next number so we could jump full go into that part of your life in the creating and all of the. I have so many questions. Okay, here we go. 14th century gave birth to pantomime. So I
Mm.
saw on your website that you have written pantomime. So I'm gonna let you take this because I wanted to know specifically like what that is and how it worked. Because when I read about it, I was like, this sounds like hilarious. This sounds like an excellent show, something I would 100% go to. So let's start at pantomime, please.
Pantomimes are basically a family show, usually
Mm,
based on a fairy tale of some kind. The accent is on comedy and music and dance numbers, and but it's a very quite a flexible sort of form, and it's a real tradition in Britain, especially at this time of year around the Christmas period. That
mhm,
especially if you've got kids, that you go and see a pantomime, and a pantomime it goes all the way from big professional productions starring uh, well-known actors from TV and film at one level, right down to small communities, just little community theatre or schools putting on their pantomime shows. And
mhm,
it's at that lower end is kind of where I've worked as an actor and a writer. I've
mhm,
played several roles in. I've done most of the kind of. There are certain set roles that you always get. There's the dame who's normally played by a man, but this is kind of the
mhm,
idea is she's a big, noisy sort of the old middle-aged to old sort of woman. She's often a matron, a nurse, or a shopkeeper, and she's like a big embarrassing aunt, basically. Usually played, as I say, by a man. So I've had all the skirts. In one we did Dick Whittington, which is one I wrote. And once we got to the treasure to the island later on in Dick Whittington, I was in a grass skirt and the coconut bra and all that, doing all that. So but there's also several other characters. There's usually kind of a comic, a kind of a fool character
mm,
who's normally called Buttons in Cinderella, or he's called something like Silly Billy. He's like the court jester sort of character,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and there will be a beautiful heroine, and there will be what's called a principal boy, and he's kind of the main hero character, usually played by a woman as well. Especially a leggy. The traditional is very leggy and sort of like a jerkin, short pants, and she'll normally be playing someone like Robin Hood or
Mm,
Aladdin or that kind of main hero character. And there'll also be a villain to be faced, and these are
of course.
terrific characters to play. I played Abanazar from an Aladdin pantomime, and or there's King Rat in Dick Whittington, and or the Sheriff of Nottingham if it's Babes in the Wood, and these. And there's a lot of audience participation as well in these shows that
Yeah.
people basically know about because they grow up with pantomime. So when the villain comes on, everyone hisses, and the villain will shake his fist. Oh, sorry, oh, I do apologise. And the villain will shake his fist at the audience and say, "Shut up, you worms!" That's what I mean. And and the other strange is at some point somebody, someone will say something like, "I'm going to cast you, throw you down the mountain," or something, and say, "Oh no, you won't." "Oh yes, I will," and the audience is going,
There we go.
"Oh no, you won't." "Oh yes, I will." So they're like big, noisy, fun. Often have a bit of satire in them as well. There's usually kind of jokes either about um, the next town, the neighboring town, or stuff that's happening in the news or celebrities. In fact, when I write
Right, right.
pantomimes, I started writing pantomimes because, like I said, I was acting in them, and the group that I was
Yes.
most involved with, they hit a point where all the other people who usually wrote the pantomimes had basically retired or left, and so they were a bit stuck this year. And I've been doing other kinds of writing, so somebody
Mhm.
said, "Oh, could you write one?" So together with another member of the theatre, I thought, yeah, I can do this, because naturally at pantomime there is kind of a formula to it. So as long as you get
Hmm.
those, it's always got to have a big opening number. There's got to be like a messy comedy scene involving custard pies or sloshing wallpaper paste over people. So there's these elements you always have in a pantomime. And so we wrote
Mm.
Dick Whittington, which at the time we chose Dick Whittington, which is a very British kind of folk story. It's loosely based on a real life person. And at that time, it seemed like nobody was doing Dick Whittington. So we wrote that one.
Mm.
And it was well received. And we deliberately wrote it so it could be very simply put on. Because at that time we
Right.
didn't have much in the way of resources. So I deliberately wrote it to be very simple, so that you have basically 3 sets and what they call the front of curtains. So you could close the curtains and then just pretend these characters are on a street or somewhere, and then you can open the curtains
Right.
again and they've changed the backdrop and we've moved to another
Hmm.
main place. So because I'd had all that experience of being in pantomimes in different roles, I knew the structure and I knew what was needed to put on a show like this, and it was well received. And then and so that turned into ultimately 4 more scripts altogether, written
Mm.
with different people. And in fact, it was one of the people I was co-writing with, a friend of mine, Adrian, and it was he who suggested, we ought to try publishing this, and I'm so glad he did, because we
Yeah.
published them with a company called Lazy Bee Scripts, and they've become a nice little earner for me. I mean, not huge amounts of money, but it's nice that kind of every year 1 or 2 companies will put on my pantomime, and some more, little trickle of royalties come in, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just very flattering if they choose one of my pantomimes out of all the, as you can imagine, there is quite a big selection to choose from over the
Mm.
years.
Man, that sounds like a real treat where you're in the audience and there's all this participation. There's like this back and forth. Kind of reminds me of like a concert,
Mm.
so where you can play off of each other a little bit. Is there ever a point where like you play too much with the audience? And because I would imagine like you have to get on with the show at some point or the script
Uh,
to get to the next piece. But how much leeway is there in between it? That's one thing that I was really wondering.
there is a fair amount of leeway. I can remember, I think
Mm.
in my mind, I'm kind of conscious of it, that you can take it so far, but you got to think of the rest of the cast and the rest of the crew. I mean, I
Exactly.
remember
Yeah.
someone I used to work with. It was Babes in the Wood, and he was playing Friar Tuck, and he had this bit. Friar Tuck had this bit where, and it over the week we did it, it got bigger with every performance. It got longer. He kept putting more and more jokes. And then he put a dance. He put a comedy dance into this bit as well,
Wow.
and it kind of got longer and longer like this. But he was so good at it. He got away
Mm.
with it because he was so funny and good at doing that. It can get you out of trouble as well. I remember I was really late. Unfortunately, it was one of those. I don't know who ever had this problem. I'd put diesel into my petrol car by accident, ruined the car. Had to get the breakdown people out. So I was really late to turn up, and I was, oh God,
Mm.
I don't know how I'm going to make it. So by the time I got there, they decided, well, we'll have they sort of had the interval before the show, and then he says, right, we're just going to do the whole show all the way through without an interval, and
Mm.
then we'll be back on time. So, but I could build that into the show, because because that's the situation. There's a bit where we were like, all the characters are trapped in a prison. We've all been imprisoned by the
Mm.
villain, and we're trying to get out. And I could like say, "Oh, Western, you think you've been here a long time already, but we're going to get." And there was another time I was playing the dame and I had this big tall wig, this huge tall wig on me, and we were pretending to be frightened because we're in this haunted castle. And there's a
Mm.
ghost that kind of, somebody in a sheet keeps coming out, and we react, and we got so kind of into it, and we're like shaking each other, and my wig goes flying off across the stage. And the audience just love. I mean, they love those moments when when it's out of control. They love that kind of unscripted stuff. So I'm like running around, kind of still in character, looking and getting this wig back on, and
Right.
so Panto is great for these moments when it sort of really takes away. On another level, there was one where we were singing a song, and the whole I don't know why, but the hall was really hot. I can't remember. Must have been some central heating problem. It was so hot.
Mm.
We were all like dripping on stage, and so we're singing this song, and member of the audience just goes. Just keel faints away in front of us, and it's like,
Wow.
do we keep the show going, or
Yeah.
do we stop and say, is there a doctor in the house, sort of thing?
Right.
And
Uh,
thankfully, we could sort of like see out of our peripheral vision people coming forward and helping this
mm.
person. So we decided, just in that kind of telepathy of the moment, that we'd keep going and keep doing these songs. I mean, yeah, at that point we weren't getting much of a reaction from the audience because this is much more interesting what's going on the front row.
Yeah.
But it is quite loose and free form in some ways. That's why it's quite popular with comedians and the like, because they can come in and they can kind of do their shtick within
Mm.
the structure of the
The
pantomime.
framework.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice. And
What's it like? Because there's so much improvisation. What's it like when you have a team and everybody's on the same page and y'all just got things clicking? Like, what is that feeling like for people
oh,
who have never done anything, in acting or team wise?
it's really good when it's clicking, and like you say, all on the same page, and you when you both simultaneously have the kind of, you seize the moment. There's a
Mm.
one with this magic love potion that of course inevitably gets drunken by the wrong people, and this bit where me and it was the guy, the evil huntsman in Snow White,
Mm.
who's the one who's sent to kill Snow White, and he drinks it, and he's like making eyes at me, and I was playing like court gesture in that one, and
Mm.
we kind of just could improvise and just go with it in the moment. That when it's work. Having said that, in the opposite, there's
Mm.
this is not so much panto. This is more other kinds of acting. Is that there is
Mhm.
nothing like when you realise the other person has lost their way and they don't know how to get back to you, and it's awkward if you can't. It's not so bad if you're in the dialogue, because you can usually steer it and give them the right cue that gets them back on track. But I can remember this murder mystery where the person who was delivering the big, he calls, I've called you all together to reveal who the murderer
Right.
is. And she
Right.
got completely lost. And we're all kind of, because none of us can know who the murderer is until she tells us. And and I remember, just sitting there, she was, that felt it was probably only about a minute, but it felt a lot
Mm.
longer as she kind of groped around trying to find her thread again. So that's
So
when
what
it
do you
gets.
do? How'd
And
she get out of it?
she did get out of it. Unfortunately, we kind of had to let her find her own way because, like I said, none of us could really tell. None of us could suddenly go, "Oh, you mean it? It wouldn't
Right.
work.
Right.
It wouldn't make any sense." Especially because my character was a complete idiot anyway. So, you know, he was like the last person who was going to know who the murderer was. He was a real complete dunce, which is quite fun to play. So I remember, she did kind of. I mean, it was obvious. I think the audience knew what had happened, so
Mm.
she couldn't. But we sort of had to let her find her own way in that time and get back to it. But it's a horrible thing when your
Mm.
mind goes blank, and
Yep.
it's
I see it often with my girls on the basketball court because
mm-hmm.
you think they got it under control, and then you're like, oh no, they're completely lost. They don't know what to do right now. You only have so many timeouts and so on and so forth. But
Ah.
how did you get into this this creating, the acting and the writing? Was there a person that showed you? Was it a show or a movie that made you go, I think I want to try this?
Well, in terms of the writing side of it, I'd grown up in a house of books. We were all,
Mm.
both mum and dad were great readers, and so they passed that on to all their children. So I think I think a lot of people who read quite a bit think, oh, I could do, or I want to do this. I want to give other people this kind of pleasure in a book. So, and it was something at school, I found I could do. I could make up stories,
Mm.
and write and get nice comments on them from the teacher. So that encourages you a lot. So that's kind of where the writing comes from. Also, I'm a big fan of a series called Doctor Who. I don't know if you know of it,
Hmm.
and I think this is a lot true for a lot of people who get involved in fandom. Is that so? You want to read all about this series, so inevitably you read
Yeah.
up a lot of the behind the scenes, and you discover that there are these people called scriptwriters, and they write and they create these stories. And you think, wow, that's a job. How amazing is that to be able to write
Yeah.
for either Doctor Who or any TV series. That's an inspiration in itself. And on the acting side, I was a bit shy of it. I kind of felt I could do acting, but I was very shy and didn't really pursue that. But then, fortunately, one of my aunts, who was very into the kind of community theatre
Hmm.
world, um, sort of encouraged me, and so it's to my aunt Pam really that the acting. I'd done little bits of acting, just recording myself on tape recorders and that
Hmm.
kind of thing. And I think I played her some of those in the past. So they were doing this murder mystery called Boniface, if I remember right, that was what it was called, or Bonaventure. That's it, Bonaventure. It was a murder mystery, and they had this small part of this prison warden who's kind of who's transporting this prisoner, and they get stuck at this convent where the story takes
Hmm.
place. So it was a nice little part, but it had a few good lines in it, and so that was kind of my first real acting in front of an audience. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
done school, not really school plays. You'd done school concerts, but I was always just a face in the crowd at those. I was always,
Right. Right.
third shepherd on the left type of parts. So that was my first kind, and it went down well, and I stayed with that group and gradually took on bigger and bigger parts, and so that's where the acting came from. And at the same time, I was also inspired by radio plays and stuff. I was trying to write
Okay.
my own radio plays and act in them because I tried a little bit of just filming on video. This is in the VHS days when you had to have the camera. The cameras were big things that sat on your shoulder, and you could only edit. And well, for people like us, you had to edit it by sticking two VHS recorders together and just being there on the
Yep.
record pause to kind of do your cut on them. But I hadn't been very happy with the results, because you picture something in my head that looks
Mm,
amazing, and then you look at it and it's just like you and your mates
this
running
isn't good.
around in the country, in the countryside, and it's oh no, this. But with radio, I thought, oh, this is something great because you can actually do something that sounds quite slick, um, with a relatively small outlay, but you have all that kind of discipline of writing a script and getting a cast together and making it as
Mm,
good as possible. And again, Doctor Who becomes part of the thread here because there was quite a in the 80s there was quite a fanzine culture, and A5, especially once desktop publishing came along, and it seemed like
mm.
everyone and their dog was producing a fanzine around then. It was, and so,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
tape zines were a part of that. So so we were kind of actually advertising them in fanzines, and sending them through the post, these little stories. And you got any feedback, that was absolutely amazing. It,
Yeah, yeah.
and it was such good fun to do. And yeah, and I love the way that you could, from just a group of us kind of sitting around the dining room table, recording these lines, and then you just add a bit of reverb and a bit of weird, widdly, uh, sort of electronic effects
Different
off your
sounds. Yeah, yeah.
off yeah off your sister's keyboard, and suddenly, oh, we are transported to an alien planet, and creating this universe full of squeaky sounding 20 somethings. And so yeah, I enjoy radio's ability to tell big stories for
Mm,
relatively small resources.
there you go. So speaking of like creating, what is take us through your creative process. Uh, so another thing I always think of is like, what is the best like time of day that you're creative? Some people are like, if I get up really early and I start my process then, that's my most productive time. Some people are night owls, like they can't do any work until the sun goes down. So, kind of, how do those two things work for you, your creative process, and then what's your most productive time of day?
I'd say, well, generally it's the evening. I was much more of a night owl, definitely. Evenings to sometimes, yeah, well into the night when it was going well. And
Yep.
so I think that was kind of my main time. I think I've slightly adjusted now because there's so much just going on in life in general. I
Mm,
used to think, oh no, I can't find those big chunks of time where and then you realize it's different now. If I've only got an hour to work in, use that hour, and then even if I've only written a page, or I've edited 10 minutes of the next podcast, that's 10
mhm.
minutes more than if I'd not done it. So now my work process is a lot more just kind of a bit more seizing the moment and
Yeah.
fitting in time, and in amongst the all the other stuff you got to get through in the day.
Uh, Absolutely. So tell us
Mm.
about your short stories, right? You have a website, the Very British Futures, where you have all these short stories. So where did the inspiration for that come from?
Very British Futures is a podcast
Mm,
about television science fiction rather than a fiction sort of podcast. So it's more looking at television programs and discussing them. So it's more of a review podcast. Uh,
oh, okay.
Yes, you see. So I was going to mention that at the end because I didn't want to break your flow, sort of thing, in the middle. But
Part of it is sometimes you get stuff wrong, and that's the funny part.
well,
Uh, how did that come
well,
about with the reviews? And go for it.
well, what happened with that, and I'll get around to short stories afterwards. what happened? Basically, science. My head is filled with a lot of, as I often say to people, I wish I knew as much about, how money worked as I do
Mm.
about, old science fiction programs from the 70s and 80s. But there you go. The brain retains what it retains. So I had all this in my head, and I'd heard podcasts. I think I was influenced by two kinds of podcasts. One was a very good podcast called Backlisted, which is all about books and people discussing a book every week.
Hmm.
Book club type of thing. And
Right.
it seemed at this time there were also a lot of podcasts that were taking a very irreverent look at science fiction, which I can understand. That is a style where it's that you're going for the laughs. Everyone's competing to get in the best, joke about terrible acting or wobbly
Mm.
spaceships or whatever.
Mm.
And I felt there was a space for discussing not to basically discussing things a bit more seriously and appreciating what was good about them rather than sort of
Mm.
like competing on the snarky side of it. And I also wanted it to be there are certain science fiction programs that get load of podcasts. You type Star Trek or Doctor Who
Oh
into,
yeah.
there's 100 podcasts there already. So I wanted a podcast that was be about all the things that people weren't talking about generally. So that's where Very British Futures came from, where we look at the sometimes fairly well-known ones, but also series that have been kind of like forgotten by most people because
Mm.
it's getting the balance right between those two. I think if we did too much rare stuff, then people wouldn't or tune in because they'd like, what's that show? I don't recognize that. But
Right.
at the same time, you don't want to just be kind of repeating the same shows that everybody else is talking about. And it's been good fun. And going from producing radio drama, I love the straightforwardness of most podcasts. It's a lot more relaxing because whereas a radio drama, you've got lots of layers of sound effects and music
Mm.
and usually putting effects on the voices as well, even just to make people sound like they're outside or something like that. So it's
Right. Right.
quite a big undertaking. Whereas generally with a straightforward discussion podcast, you're just trying to make it sound as nice and clear and slick as your own work. Um, and it's been
Thank
good
you.
fun. It's been good fun to do, and we've got plenty more lined up on that. And the website is just kind of gives you a bit more further reading, basically, as well as
Mm.
a nice permanent home for where these podcasts can live. And it's just got a nice, further reading and
Yeah.
links and things that
Yeah.
I've discovered in the course of my research. Yeah, with short stories, one of my resolutions is to write more short stories because they are a good trading ground, and it's a great
Mm.
skill. A good short story is very satisfying because to get in and set a mood and create some characters and get a point across within
Mm.
however long it is. It can 4 pages, 20 pages. And you can get that right. That is very satisfying. I used
That
to
was gonna
talking
be
about
my
what.
next question.
Mm,
What's your
hmm
favorite thing to write?
Oh, it's very hard. I'm going to give one of those boring, equivocal sort of answers and
Oh,
say it
no
depends.
boring answers.
Oh no, yeah,
Take
yeah,
us
I
through
can't
it.
have
Break it
boring.
down. Pull it apart for
Really,
us.
it's equivocal. It depends. I suppose scripts are my favorite thing to write because they move quite
Hmm.
fast. When you're writing prose, or at least the way I write prose, you've got to be describing a lot what's going on around you and thinking about how it moves from place to place.
Mm.
Whereas with a script, especially a radio script, where you're thinking it's very dialogue based for a start, and it's fitting And there's something very satisfying about trying to set a scene, and usually, because I'm telling fairly action-packed kind of stories, is getting that action over without having people saying, "Oh, the classic line that people use is, I should warn you, the gun in my left hand is loaded," which is that sort of, you don't want that sort of line in it. You don't want those terrible expository sort of lines in.
Right.
So I
You
love
want
the
people to know
challenge.
without you having to tell them.
Yeah, exactly. So like, which involves sound effects, and so I mean, a simple thing is, um, something like, something, and well, apparently they've uncovered something. They've uncovered something interesting in Peru, and then you have a sound
Mm.
effect of an aeroplane landing, and then you go to the jungle. You don't need to explain that they booked tickets, for an aircraft, and they've flown there in an aircraft, because people know that. They know that's what you've done, and that you've had to drive from the airport to the archaeological site. So you can get over all that, and you can just, oh no, there's a
Yeah,
jungle, and we're
here we are.
talking now. There we are, and you realize you can trust. It's, in some ways, it's giving the listener permission to make their own pictures. I remember an early Doctor Who
Mm.
audio, and I sort of had this line. Involved a monster attacking people on this planet, and I put in this line of, "Oh, it looks like a small Tyrannosaurus Rex," and then it's not important that they know, as long as they establish that it's carnivorous and it's got big teeth, it doesn't matter. You can leave it up to the listener to decide on what it actually looks like.
Mm.
So that's a part of radio writing that I find quite interesting, and I'm very influenced by. There's a guy called Dirk Maggs, who a British producer, drama producer, who does these brilliant cinematic style audio stories. He's done quite
Mm.
a few comic strip adaptations, like he did an excellent Batman. He adapted the whole. I don't know how much you know about comics or whatever, but there was a saga in Batman called Nightfall all around, and he
Mm.
adapted all that into a radio series, and that's been one of my go-to models for, that's how you do it. That's how you do an action-packed story. And I was just listening to Lord of the Rings, the BBC radio version of Lord of the Rings, and what
Mm-hmm.
strikes me is how sparse it is. Listen, it was done in the early 80s, and you think now it would be easy, just, because of the software we have and the technology, to have loads of layers and all kinds of environmental sounds going on in that, as well as
Mm-hmm.
the music. Whereas it actually sounds really sparse. It's just the odd sound effect, but it
Right.
works. My word, because of well chosen music and lots of Shakespearean actors giving it all their best. It sounds properly epic and large. That's one of my unfulfilled ambitions, to do a good big
Mm.
fantasy epic at some point. I
Okay.
thought that.
That takes us actually into our last part. Our three
Mm-hmm.
whats. There we go. Okay, so um we're gonna start with the first one
Mm-hmm.
because you talked about a ton of different things and kind of maybe some things that may be better if they were done now, which a lot of people, they're like nostalgic. They're like, no, don't touch anything, leave it the way we remember it. And there's a lot of money in nostalgia. So, first, what's an opinion that you have that will be considered unpopular?
Oh, an artistic opinion. I don't know how niche. This might be too niche, but I'm a big fan of Quatermass, which was both a TV series and a series of films from Hammer Studios. And generally, everyone lays, and the first two Quatermass films have an actor called Brian Donlevy, And usually
Mm-hmm.
everyone hates Brian Donlevy and says he was a terrible
Mm-hmm.
choice. He was well known for playing kind of gangsters and heavies in American films. So he was in some ways an odd choice to play this British scientist. But I actually love that he comes in and plays it like a gangster, this scientist as a gangster, and that in a way he's kind of the biggest monster in his own film, even though he's fighting aliens.
Mm.
His utter obsession with sending rockets into space, regardless of the terrible human costs all around him, which he never seems to notice hardly, that's going on. I find that a really interesting take, rather than other Quatermasses who are good, but they're the more sort of traditional, very liberal, kind of very empathic, concerned, guilt-ridden character. For they feel really bad for all the terrible things that have happened as a result of their. But I quite like the way Brian Donlevy just kind of
Go for it.
brushes his way through it all, and
At all
uh,
costs.
at all costs. So that's. I mean, there are films I love that generally other people aren't very keen on. I think another one. I mean, this one seems to become more popular. There was a time the original '80s Dune movie I absolutely loved, and I watched it again and again. I thought it was
Mm.
brilliant. And it was a surprise when I later in fandom discovered how much it's not liked by a lot
Mm.
of people who think it's a terrible adaptation of the book. But I think it's bursting with great images and fun performances. And in fact, weirdly, a quote
Okay.
whilst we've been having this interview, a quote from Dune popped into my mind with
Mm.
where there's a line where one of the soldiers said, "Mood is for cattle and love play," and which is all that thing about. You can't wait for the muse. I think if you're writing or creating, you can't wait for the muse to land. I think you've got
Mm.
to just do it basically, rather than wait around for it. You kind of sometimes got to make it happen a bit,
There we
in
go.
even if you're not quite feeling it sometimes. Because as I said to you a little earlier on before the official um, interview started, friends of mine who are
Yeah,
full
yeah.
time writers, they treat it like a job. They don't wake up and say, "Oh, I'm not feeling very inspired today."
Don't feel right
They
writing
know
today.
they know they got to be in there, writing and creating, and generally doing a fine job of it.
There we go. That brings us to our second what? Look at you,
Mm-hmm.
G. If you weren't a writer, what would you be pursuing?
Ooh, that's a hard. I think if I wasn't being creative, because I'm going to include it. You said writing, but I'm going to kind of include sound producing and
Mm, the
all that
acting.
kind of
If you weren't
that
doing what you're doing
acting.
now, what would
I
it
wasn't
be?
being creative like that.
Mm.
I think there's two ways. I think I'd still be teaching. I think I'm
Mm.
discovering. I quite enjoy that. I quite enjoy training people and teaching people things, and people. And I've had some nice feedback from people who say I'm very patient with
Mm.
people, and so I can see myself doing that. And I think if it wasn't that in a slightly more negative way, I think I could have. There's an obsessive side in me, and I think I could have become a very obsessive collector of things, which I kind of
Ooh.
was when I was young. When I was young, I had that thing about. Well, in my case, it was kind of Doctor Who, and anything that had Doctor Who on it, I was interested in buying it and having it in my room. Whereas now I'm a lot more, I'm not as bothered about things. I like a
Mm.
nice box set and a bookshelf, but I don't have that kind of. I need to get everything in the series
Right. Right.
sort of, feeling in me. But I think if I didn't, but I might have gone that way more if I couldn't be creative. I could see my.
Okay. Okay. Last what?
Mm-hmm.
If you were given advice to someone in high school, so a primary school, right before university, you're getting ready to graduate, what advice would you give to that person?
I think my main thing is you learn by doing, basically. I think if you want to be a writer, you got to write. It's no good. You
Mm,
can read as many books about writing as you like, and I do have a few of those on my shelf. But ultimately, you've got to sit down and face that horrible blank page and put stuff into it. And it's the same with any other creative. If you're painting, or I think any creative endeavor, you learn by doing,
mm,
and that's how. And also, you look at other people's. It's easy to be intimidated by other people. I feel intimidated. There are some authors I read, and I think, well, why do I, and you can feel, well, why do I even try? Because they're just so good what they've done there. That's like magic sleight of hand, what they did with that
right.
story. Robert Shearman, thinking about you. You've got to believe. No, you do have something to add. There's a very good cartoon, I
Mm,
think, illustrates this. There's someone's brought a cake. It's a country fair or something, and they're having the bake cake competition. And this person brings a cake to the table, and they say, "Oh, this is terrible! Look at that cake over there. That's absolutely amazing. My cake looks
mm.
absolutely rubbish." And and then somebody else comes along and says, "Hey, two cakes." So
There we
I
go.
think we can be our own worst enemies sometimes. Don't learn to ignore that little voice in you. Of course, you can take it the other way. Don't become like Donald Trump and
The-
think that everything you do is absolutely amazing and get very angry with people who point out that it's not. But yeah, but generally, yeah, ignore the little voice.
well, that's a great place to leave it. But before we go, please, Mr. Preston, tell people where they can find your work, where they can find you, and yeah.
hmm Well, if you're interested in very British futures, we're available on. Just search for that on all. We're on all the major podcast stations or platforms, I should say. You can also, probably the easiest place to find all the stuff I'm doing is go to garethpreston.blog. So, and that's where I cover. You'll find short stories I've written in the past. You'll find stuff about the podcast and stuff about friends of mine who I'm more than happy to plug on there, and things like the Talking Pictures podcast I regularly appear on. So that, I would say, that's your first port of call, garethpreston.blog. Or you can follow me on Twitter at gazhack, one word.
There we go. There we go. Thank you all for listening. I want to thank my wonderful guest, Gareth Preston, for coming on even at this hour, because at this point it's probably 10, almost 10:30 there. Thank you for coming on, spending some time with me. And make sure you all like, subscribe, share, all of that great stuff. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram, The Living Numbers Podcast. And I will see you all in the next Ramble. Boom.